Wait a second, why did the US military just blow up what looks like an innocent old fishing vessel in the disputed South China Sea? Airstrikes from US and Filipino fighter jets, coordinated with a barrage of high-precision rockets and artillery fire that completely obliterated the boat in a joint training exercise and a show of force, proving that overkill is in the eye of the beholder. Because these types of quasi-civilian fishing boats have actually increasingly been used by the Chinese Navy to carry weapons and harass other nations recently. The mock drill was a hypothetical response preparing for an invasion by, a near peer, let's say. It was done alongside 16,000 allies in the Filipino force and 14 other countries from around the world, even utilizing Australian Air Force surveillance assets. Despite the fact that the United States and Filipino officials have said this wasn't directed at any country in particular, the message was clear. No fishing allowed. No, the point was that the US and its allies are well aware of China's mysterious third naval force, and they're prepared to take action if need be. What is this third naval force? But first, I want to tell you about the people that made this video possible, Conflict of Nations, a super fun and free online PvP strategy game. If World War III broke out, which country would you want to lead? Well, in Conflict of Nations, you can do exactly that. You pick your nation, set your economy, and army recruitment up for success, and then play it out in the game while fighting up to 128 other players in real-time battles that can take up to weeks to complete. Whether it's modern tanks, stealth fighter jets, nuclear submarines, or any other units, it's up to you to build up your own military however you see fit to declare war on your neighbors or forge alliances with other players. Choose your strategy to engage in epic battles and even take over the world. You can play with the same account on both PCs and mobile, and the gameplay is super smooth on either platform. Right now, Conflict of Nations has a special exclusive gift for you. Just click our link in the description to get 13,000 gold premium currency and 1 month of the premium account features for free. We're used to hearing about militias on the ground, but we rarely hear anything about paramilitary naval forces. In March of 2009, the USNS Impeccable was surrounded by a swarm of Chinese vessels as it sailed through the international waters of the South China Sea. Towing a sonar array, the Impeccable conducted surveillance operations on submarines operating in the area. 70 miles off the coast of Hainan, a Chinese Naval Frigate, a Maritime Fisheries Patrol Vessel, and 2 fishing trawlers began circling the United States Impeccable. After the frigate failed to intimidate the US warship, the 2 fishing trawlers began sailing dangerously close, throwing grappling hooks into the water willy-nilly. The fishermen attempted to snag the Impeccable's towed sonar array. When that failed, they positioned themselves in front of the United States Impeccable and dumped waste and debris into the ship's path to force an emergency stop. Those sonar arrays, just for context, they cost about an estimated $25 million and they take prolonged periods of time to build. What might sound like or look like simple horsing around on the high seas when you hear about it or you see it in the news, it's actually an incredibly high-stakes game. These vessels are part of China's maritime militia, a shadowy umbrella force composed of multiple private fishing companies that take up government contracts to act as modern-day privateers. Employing private vessels to project power and harass your adversaries was a common practice in the 18th century England and France, who both employed hundreds of privateers under legal contracts called letters of marque. In modern times, think of it like China's version of the Wagner Group, but with fishing boats. To understand the Filipinos' perspective about a little on this, let's look at what the ambassador to Washington, D.C. had to say. Quote, "We're under the gun. We don't have the wherewithal to be able to fight all of this bullying coming from China, so where else will we go? We went to the United States and those that believe in what the US is doing." If he sounds frustrated to you, then yeah, that's because he is. These militia fishing boats have used powerful water cannons, military-grade lasers, and blocking movements in these disputed waters that have led to collisions and injuries for Filipino naval personnel. In 2024, China's People's Liberation Army Navy is growing at a breakneck speed. In 2020, China became the largest navy in the world by the number of ships. They're leaning heavily into the lever of quantity. So with a fast-growing navy, why would China turn to civilian fishing trawlers to help enforce their control over the South China Sea? And how do these civilian vessels fit into China's overall naval strategy? Are they pirates, mercenaries, or something else entirely? China's People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia, or PAFMM, is also colloquially known as China's Third Sea Force. Who is the first Sea Force? That would be the Chinese Navy. Who's the second Sea Force? That would be the Chinese Coast Guard, or the CCG. Together, these two forces unite to form a comprehensive maritime defense strategy. I like to think of it this way. The United States primarily projects power at sea using what's called a comprehensive naval strategy. This is a very structured, strategic process, with the president first publishing a national security strategy. Then the Navy uses that to publish its own strategic guidance. And then each of the Navy's geographic combatant commands use this to push their own more specific theater guidance. This structured trickle-down of strategy is mandated by law in the United States and specifically tasks the Department of Defense under Title 10 U.S. Code. Just saying that out loud sounds a lot like a very structured Western approach. So wait till you get a load of this. China, on the other hand, uses an integrated layered approach, weaving conventional military force in with maritime lawfare and unconventional strategy from its three sea forces. I'm gonna sound like a hack saying this, but when has that ever stopped me before? Sun Tzu has a quote that applies here. He said, quote, "Be extremely subtle, even to the point of formlessness." Is that not exactly how you would describe China's Third Sea Force? China would not be the first nation to deploy civilian maritime vessels this way. In 1975, US Navy commanders were writing about how the Soviet Union's massive fishing fleet had a spy ring used to track and report on US ships. CIA documents from 1982 also lead with the headline, "The Soviet Pacific Fishing Fleet, after more than fish." In this approach, conventional military force is only one part of their overall maritime strategy. This is important because as the US and the West enters into a new global era of strategic competition with China, we need to understand that we are not going back into the same global arms race that we won in the Cold War. With China's layered maritime strategy, it's not as easy to simply compare one's military assets to the other, because this is not how China is designed or plans to fight. This is China's infamous 9-dash line, a controversial sovereignty claim that critics of China say ignores the exclusive economic zones of Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. To say people are sensitive in Asia about these lines is an understatement, and I can understand why. The 9 dashes also contradicts the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea. In 2016, a UN arbitration ruled that the 9-dash line gives China, quote, "no legal basis to the South China Sea." Despite this, China still claims that old maps contain these, quote, dash marks of sovereignty, and they claim it gives China authority over the entire region and its resources, which should make all of us concerned that Great Britain might find some old maps in their basement. The way China tries to enforce this claim is where China's Third Sea Force is used most. These small strips of atoll islands are where a lot of the drama from China's maritime militia unfolds. They're collectively called the Spratly Islands, and they mark the southeastern perimeter of China's 9-dash line. These fishing vessels are being paid by the Chinese government to anchor and wait to intercept and harass any non-Chinese ships that attempt to enter the area. Investigation conducted by CSIS, researchers found that roughly 300 militia vessels are operating in the Spratly Islands on any given day. You may already know about China building military outposts in some of these islands, like Taiping, San Kei, and Gavin Reefs. Around the latter, Gavin Reefs, you can see a lot of militia activity. That's because only 12 miles to the east is the Vietnam-controlled island. 50 kilometers to the south, you can see the same thing happening in the Union Banks Atoll. They're within waving distance of one another. The situation is as awkward as it is dangerous. When Vietnamese sailors send out logistics ships to resupply their forces stationed on these outposts, Chinese fishing boats anchored offshore activate and do everything they can to deter them. With high-powered water cannons and dangerous maneuvers, the trawlers are a non-military blockade that is purposefully acting just below the threshold of armed conflict. China's idea here is to make it so difficult to support the islands that Vietnam just decides to abandon them. And by using innocent-looking fishing boats, it helps to make them appear less aggressive on the international news. In fact, seeing the US military blow one up at the beginning of the video probably made you feel a little weird down in the plums at first. That's exactly the plan. According to that CSIS study, China's maritime militia operate out of a string of 10 ports in China's Guangdong and Hainan provinces. Somewhere in this cluster of government buildings is the Shaanxi Sana Affairs Management Bureau. Despite this being a well-developed area, Google Street Maps is not available, and the map layer is suspiciously offset from the satellite imagery of the roads and buildings. What are you hiding there, Xi Jinping? And at this port lies one of China's newest branches of its maritime militia, the Sansha. In shipyards only a few clicks away from China's newest aircraft carrier and one of China's largest naval bases, civilian fishing vessels are being custom built to serve dual military purposes. In a report published by both the U.S. Naval War College and the China Maritime Studies Institute, the militia in the Sansha City Fisheries Development Company was established to be a professional paramilitary force. Sansha Maritime Militia members have been photographed loading crates labeled light weapons onto one of their several dozen newly delivered large vessels, all of which boast mast-mounted water cannons, collision-absorbing rails, and reinforced hulls. Highly useful features for aggressive spraying and ramming. The largest Sansha maritime militia vessels are 59 meters long, with 9-meter berms, and likely displace approximately 750 tons. Okay, this story is starting to make a lot more sense to me now. In total, 4 primary groups comprise the main veins of China's maritime militia. I've put their names in text on screen right now, not because I can't pronounce them, but because it's in poor taste to show and tell during a YouTube video. That last name, the TAIWAN, actually received direct praise from Xi Jinping, the president, as the model militia in 2013, and that should just go to show just how important these militias are to China's plans. Investigations reveal that 90% of the militia vessels identified in conflict with the Philippine, Vietnamese, and other ships in the South China Sea are privately owned by only a handful of investors. And this is where the rabbit hole gets even more. There's more rabbits in there. What I'm saying is these investors are for the most part not concerned about hiding their identity through anonymous shell corporations. Instead, they appear confident that their ship's actions are under the consent and protection of the CCP. A 2021 report that focuses on the financial network of the maritime militia claims that each vessel that participates in militia operations received only 500 RMB, or about $70 a day. This is far less than what these vessels can earn for a day's catch, but considering that most of the time all they have to do is sit at anchor with a minimal crew, makes this a nice passive income in the off-season. According to the other reports, militia vessels can also qualify for special fuel subsidies at special rates. While there is no definitive number on how many vessels are enlisted at full-time and part-time militia, it's important to note that China boasts the largest civilian fleet in the world. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Administration, China has an estimated 500,000 fishing vessels at sea. Now, many of these ships will not meet the minimum specifications to qualify as militia vessels. However, in 2022, China had nearly 3,000 deep-sea fishing vessels capable of operating all across the globe. This is not even taking into account the thousands of civilian container, cargo, and logistical transport ships all operating under the Chinese flag. It is likely that only a small number of these ships operate regularly or even part-time as militia vessels. However, as an authoritarian country, China has the ability to conscript civilian vessels and their crews to serve military purposes. In January 1974, Vietnamese Navy Colonel Han Van was irate. Looking over the bow of his ship, he watched 2 trawlers from the South China Sea Fishery Company harass his frigates like gnats in the eye of a tiger. Firing on the vessels would be a clear violation of international law, but despite continued warnings, the ship refused to disperse. Meanwhile, another pair of fishing trawlers transported 500 PLA shock troops from the Hainan military district to the Parcels Island that Vietnam and China were fighting over, quickly overwhelming the Vietnamese troops stationed there. This first documented use of maritime militia vessels by China resulted in a Chinese victory. The initial success grew the maritime militia into what is seen as primarily 2 branches. One is a highly professional full-time militia that coordinates offensive harassment with the Chinese Navy and the Chinese Coast Guard. These ships are often renovated with high-powered water cannons, extra storage capacity, upgraded navigation and communication suites to include GPS spoofing, and reinforced hulls for ramming. The other are those weekend warriors who still primarily fish with their businesses, but are able to provide auxiliary support such as transporting fuel, food, troops, or other supplies to the Chinese naval bases and vessels. Together, these branches create a cheap, plentiful, and legally ambiguous support structure to cause just the right kind of chaos on China's behalf. Vietnam is not the only country struggling to deal with these militia vessels. On October 4, 2023, Al Jazeera reported that 3 Filipino fishermen died after their fishing boat was struck by a still unidentified foreign commercial vessel in the South China Sea. In response to continued militia harassment, the Philippines announced in August 2023 that they would deploy their own maritime militia to confront bad Chinese behavior in the Spratly Islands. Vietnam began their own maritime militia program in 2007 when the Ministry of National Defense of Vietnam issued Directive 04-CT-BQP, guidelines for strengthening the construction of maritime militia self-defense forces. Pretty soon, every fishing boat in the South China Sea will be packing heat and repping the flag. But what about in a time of war? How could the maritime militia act as a force enabler for the Chinese Navy if there was a conflict over Taiwan? Experts expect militia boats to play a variety of roles in a future conflict. These civilian-ish vessels could provide China with early warning, surveillance, reconnaissance, transport troops, as U.S. forces would likely be very hesitant at targeting civilian craft, even if it was Chinese. For China, these vessels are also ideal for dispersed logistics. Civilian vessels can deliver fuel, repair parts, and ammunition to Chinese naval ships in a covert way. The more elite branch of the maritime militia could hide drones, sea mines, electronic warfare components, or anti-ship missiles as part of their cargo, and then blend into civilian maritime traffic before and after launching an attack. In essence, China's Third Sea Force is a maritime version of Mao Zedong's People's Army that can support the more conventional Chinese Navy in irregular and guerrilla warfare at sea. However, that's not to say that the United States and her allies are doing nothing in the wake of China's maritime militia. Experts agree that to take the wind out of China's sails, her Third Sea Force might be brought into the light. One of the greatest advantages of the maritime militia is the protections it gets from the ambiguous civilian military nature of the ships and crew. By building a database that identifies the ships as a maritime militia vessel, then other nations can remove any doubts that the fishing boat off their bow is a vessel of the state. This solution is supported by the CSIS through programs like the Asian Transparency Initiative that tracks Chinese maritime militia activity and presents its information as open access for others to see. On the policy side, Steve Sachs, a Marine Corps Reserve Intelligence Officer and former lead analyst in the Pentagon's-based China Research Group, recommends the United States leverage Section 1202 of the National Defense Authorization Act. According to Sachs, the section allows for the United States military to create, develop, train, and maintain partner relationships with irregular maritime forces from across the region. Working with local maritime partners is going to be the only realistic way the United States can try to balance the scales when it comes to the sheer volume of China's 3 sea forces that they try to bring to bear. Finally, updating policy and clarifying the rules of engagement at sea to include clear and understandable measures to take when confronted by maritime militia vessels is essential to maintaining operational initiative. Battles can quickly be lost if commanders are paralyzed by swarms of civilian fishing vessels off their bows, jamming their electronic signals and blocking their path. Arming sailors with clear rules of engagement and a means of identifying who's the enemy and who is not is going to be the key to winning any future maritime conflict with China. Leveraging foreign partners, especially privateers of our own, will also be essential for balancing the power of China's massive paramilitary fleets. After doing research on this branch of China's maritime force, I feel that it's impossible to have any conflict without maritime militias playing a major role. What are your thoughts on China's maritime militia? Let me know in the comments section down below, and be sure to grab one of our new t-shirts, Shoot to Chill instead of Shoot to Kill. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Thank you for watching, signing off this net time now. And don't forget to check out Conflict of Nations, the free online PvP strategy game, giving away an exclusive gift to all of you. Just click on the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of their premium account for free.